You know, I'm Pastor Corey again. One thing I would say is, you might not know the people in the choir. You might not know the people that were up here today. But we have the privilege of knowing them, not just knowing where they are now, but knowing where they came from.
Yeah.
And you just see regular people, and I see messed up. I see a lot of history and a lot of pain. And I see a lot of the redemptive work of Jesus in a life.
Yeah.
You know, all the counseling in the world, it's great, but it can't do what Jesus can do. All of the health, it cannot do what the person of Jesus Christ can do in the power of the Holy Spirit, in the healing and redeeming of a life. So I just want to welcome you to Venue Easter. We're glad that you came and joined us today. I do need to say a thank you, a quick shout out to the Dream Team. That's our team of volunteers here who puts on services like this. And the Dream Team, 42 baptisms last week. And so thank you. That is a team effort. Yeah, it was incredible just to be a part of 42 lives changed forever. So my Easter sermon is called Late to the Party. Late to the party. Sometimes you feel like you're late to the party. Sometimes some of you were late to this party. You can laugh. It's okay. Just do me a favor. Just turn to your neighbor and say, "Hey, you look great today." I don't think we hear that. Now turn to the person that you didn't turn to first. Turn to your second choice and be like, "You look great too. You look better than the first person." I'm sorry. You've been working out? Okay. Good. Now that we're friends. Today's, in our text today, I'm not going to go through the typical resurrection of Christ. I'll touch on that. I'm going to actually go through, Jesus is resurrected in our text today. He's resurrected. He appears to other people. And then the last person in this group that he appears to is a man named Thomas. Now, I don't know if you grew up in Sunday school and church, but we call Thomas Doubting Thomas, but he was the last one. He was late to the party. And I just want to say that you might think that you are late to the party in life, but God still has a plan for you. Thanks, John. Have you ever been late to the party?
Yes.
Never? Did Layden just say never? He's never been late to the party. We had a team just get back from a trip to El Salvador. And so my older girls went on that team. They were building houses for the less fortunate and built 18 houses. So like entire homes for like people who could never afford to do that. Incredible. And Dustin and Janine, they're the ones who led that team. I don't know if they're sitting in the service or where they are, probably serving. But Dustin, my kids were telling me about this. Dustin gathered everybody on the team, and he was telling them a story. And he said, you know, one of the builders was cutting through some of the metal with a saw and ended up cutting a couple of his fingers off. And everybody's, are you laughing? Unreal. And everybody's like leaning in, you know, like safety talk, right? And then Dustin says, so they took him to the hospital, and he was asking the doctor, like, is my hand going to be okay? And the doctor said, I wouldn't count on it. Apparently, Dustin has been reading a book called Dad Jokes. Now, you can think I'm a monster, but that's not something I said. I was just repeating it. And my kids came home from that mission trip, from that incredible third world experience, and they came home and then they started telling me how great Dustin was. And like, oh, he's so funny. Like, I wish that my dad was funny like this and whatever. And I'm like, shut up. And then, but some people didn't get the joke right away. You know, there's always one. And if you don't think that, it's you. And so, because after the joke was told, everybody's just like grown. But then, I don't know if Josh is here. Y'all know Josh. He's a plumber, so... Josh, he's like, but what about the guy's fingers? Some of y'all in this room still don't get the joke. I think sometimes, though, in life, as I'm thinking about it, as I see a lot of people's stories, as I have my own story, I don't know if you've ever felt this, but we can feel like we're late to the party. We feel like there's a joke that's happening that we're not in on yet, that we don't quite get. Or maybe in your faith journey, you have felt that God has forgotten about you. He hasn't forgotten about you. I want to give you a promise. He has not forgotten about you, but we have a saying here, distance creates distortion. And God is not the one who leaves. So it's just like, yeah, but in that distance, we start feeling like we are unseen, that we are unheard, that there's things going on in our lives that if God is good, then why is this happening? It's because we don't understand that with that distance, it does create distortion, and it removes you from the presence and power of the living God as well. See, you might be what we call a creaster, like welcome to church at Easter, and you come at Christmas and Christmas, Easter, creaster. But what God intended for you was not that. He intends an actual like marriage. Like that's what is the closest human relationship that could be compared to what Jesus is looking for with you. And so it would be a little bit, because I hear people say all the time, I'm a pastor, like, hey, I believe in God. Like I have my own thing going on. I'm like, that doesn't mean that you have a relationship that he intended or designed or made possible, or like I can say like, hey, I have a relationship with Pastor Aaron, but if I don't live in that house and I come for dinner a couple times a year, she's not going to say that we have a relationship, and I'm not even going to get dinner. But it's this idea of like, maybe it's not what it could be. Yeah. Maybe it's not what God intended, But I want to, let me just go back a little bit here. I don't know if anybody's ever felt like life has passed you by. Whether happiness or fulfillment or family or stability or purpose. And I think if you're like me, I think what we have is we have an event or a series of events that we look back to in our lives, and they're the thing that stopped us. So they're like your parents got a divorce, and you're like, well, I can't be like that person because they grew up in a home, and I can't have this in my family because nobody showed me how to do it. And so, but they had somebody, so they have something I don't have. That's why they, or a betrayal or some key relationship in your life fell to pieces. And we look back to these moments of, or you did something really stupid and blew up your life. And you look back to these events or these series of events. And then, because it's easier to look back and blame something that maybe was outside of your control as the reason why you're not going where you ought to and where you could. And it's easier to look back and say, yeah, that. But if that didn't happen and we sort of hang our hat on it and hang the rest of our life on it. But God is not looking back at that event like the way that you look back at it. God can do anything in spite of anything. But that's often, well, if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't betrayed me, then I wouldn't be like this. I wouldn't feel like this. I wouldn't think like this. Sin is all fun. There's a lot of talk in society now that sin isn't sin anymore, but that's dumb. What sin does is sin separates. That's why it needs to be addressed. And calling it something different is pretty hard to heal. If you know what I'm saying. It's like the person who's like, I'm not sick. Like, no, you're clearly sick. You're clearly not doing well, And so the enemy, rather than us dealing with sin, he's just called sin, whatever you want to call it, I guess now. But sin is all fun and games, makes all these promises, but it does pay out in death and the death of relationships. But it does make promises of pleasure and belonging and identity and happiness. But I mean, here's the thing. The scriptures tell us that all of those things belong to the Lord. But the enemy will always like, hey, if you just do this over here, if you just hang out with this group, if you try this, if you like, and then we have the nerve after all of these things don't work out, then we get mad at God as if it was his fault that we never sought him for the things that he said he was the author of and the only one able to do in our lives. But it's all fun and games until sin catches up with you, and then the phone call, and then the realization, and it starts to fall to pieces. It's all fun and games until you eat an entire chocolate Easter bunny that dad told you not to eat. Now, I was a kid before woke. So I was a kid back when the world made sense, everybody. I was a kid back in the day where moms and dads raised their own kids and said no. In fact, they seemed to say no to me a lot. I was, before woke Easter bunnies. You know what that is? Like, it's made out of carrots and quinoa or something. Now, I'm not even sure what quinoa is, but I know I don't like it. I had to look up how to spell that to put that in my sermon. And there is something wrong with quinoa, and if you like it, there's something wrong with you. There's just like, I don't know what it is, the texture, the taste, You're like, well, I flavor it, then it tastes good. I'm like, you know what tastes good? Things that are already flavored. But my wife keeps feeding it to me, but like, this was a solid chocolate Easter bunny. And not like a chocolate Easter bunny. It was like a chocolate Easter bunny, like the size of an actual, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're under like 30, you don't know what I'm talking about. You're just going to have to trust me. That we had chocolate Easter bunnies this big, and my grandma gave me one because I was the favorite. And it was, when I keep saying solid, I'm like, you're not getting it. It's not hollow. It's solid. So it was like 400 chocolate bars all rolled into one. And my dad said, don't eat it. And I'm like, it would make me happy to eat it. And dad's like, I don't care about your happiness. My parents are retired now, but they're here in the church. And my dad's like, I mean, here's the difference too, right? Like, I was raised by parents. I wasn't raised by my best friends. So we're friends now. But he's like, dude, I don't care if you like me or not. Don't eat that thing. I had a thing called a curfew. Look it up. It's like 11 o'clock. I'm in high school. I'm like, why do I have to come home at 11 o'clock? And dad's like, because bad things happen at night. Right. I'm like, bad things happen during the day too, Dad. He's like, whatever. If you want to come home and the lock's not to be changed, then 11 o'clock is your magic time. And because some of you have never heard this, but why? Because I said so. You should try it. You'd like it. It doesn't feel good in the moment, but it makes sense. And so now we have things that we can spy on our kids with called phones. And so we're spying on our kids all the time. We always know where they are. And Pastor Erin gets nervous now because she forgot what life was like back then. And she gets nervous now, and she's like, where are the kids? It's Thursday night. There's 140 like kids at youth on Thursday night. 140 kids. And Pastor Erin, it's like 10 o'clock. And she's like, our kids aren't home. Our kids aren't home. What's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm like, they're clearly at the church. If there's one place on earth that they could be, that they would be. Relax. And then I said the words that my dad used to say to me, relax. Curfews. You should try it. I want to get myself in trouble, but I don't know. Should I or should I? Yeah. I like I should. This is back in the day when parents told you the truth about you. They were like, oh, baby, I like zebras. I want to be a zebra. No. I like hamburgers, but that's not going to work out. Where did it go wrong? I figured it out. The Lord showed me. It went wrong with that Oscar Mayer Wiener song. I wish I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener. That is what I truly like to be. Because if I were, you're not. But you're not, though. Should write that down. Leighton, write that down. Back when moms and dads said no for stuff, I offered to push my little brother in a baby carriage one time, just out of the goodness of my heart. And my mom's like, oh, this is new. He's being helpful. And then the Lord said to my mom, probably, like, where are you right now, Beth? Like, take a look around. We were on top of a giant hill. And mom said no. That's one of my girls, they'll say that to each other, like, mom says no. Yeah. And mom said no to me. Will babies fly? We won't know. Because mom said no. So, Easter Sunday, Jesus is risen. Monday morning at 2 a.m., the Easter bunny is rising. Because I ate the whole thing. My personality is like, if 1 is good, 10 is better. Little boys, you don't know this, but there's a little devil sitting on the shoulders of little boys. He's got a 0 IQ. But it's just like, just go for it, dude. Just like, jump that. Do it. Shoot that. Eat that. You don't want people to think you're a coward. And I'm not a coward. I ate that whole thing. And I got to explain, like, the 2 a.m. I wake up and I'm like, oh, it's coming. And I tried to wait it out a little bit like you do, like 1, 2, and I'm like, okay. But I got to explain the layout of the house here. You don't really understand it. So my little brother, his name is Ryan. And there's a lot in the meaning of a name, if you think about it. And his name means little king, and that's how he was treated in our home. Here's your crown, your majesty, And it's not that I resent him. I love my brother, It's not his fault. He was raised by his best friends. But he got to live up with humans upstairs in the palace, And do we have any firstborns in the house? Yeah. Okay, I'm a firstborn. So the reason our parents had rules is because they had no money. Yeah. Right? But then the other kids come along and all of a sudden it's like, oh, they have stuff we don't have. Yeah. 2 cars? Oh my, a family. Anyways, I could go on. But Ryan lived upstairs in this beautiful room. And my parents, see, my name is Corey. And Corey means dweller by a hollow or a seething pool. So like a hermit, right? Like the weird guy in the woods, hanging out behind the grocery store. But that's where he lives, right? So I'm like, can I live upstairs? And they're like, what don't you get about this? You can live on the other side of the undeveloped basement with no bathrooms because the bathrooms belong to Ryan. And so when this is going on, it's a problem because, when you're in a panic, that basement was like 2 miles long, and I got to make it across the basement and up the stairs to use the bathroom that had a soft cedar door that somebody had scratched in there, Ryan is a girl. We wasn't woke, I'm telling you. To like a young boy, that's the worst thing I could think of to call my brother because I went to a Christian school and didn't know any swear words. And girls are the source of cooties. And then God gave me 4 daughters, so whatever. He's got a sense of humor. And so the Easter bunny is coming, and I try to wait it out, and I can't, and I make a run for it. And it is risen. It is risen on the walls. It is risen. It is risen. And I remember my dad from the palace upstairs heard me and came down and cleaned it up. And I remember thinking to myself, who would do that? Because I would just come down and be like, I told you. That's really what God, your Father, did. Adam and Eve in the garden, the first of us, the best of us. It's funny how happy they were until they started listening to a snake. God creates all these trees in the garden. Everything they could imagine, it's Eden, it's paradise. Everything they could want, it's there. They're not even wearing any clothes. It's amazing. Somebody did a pastor just say that? I did say that. I needed a new joke for this service. They have everything. And then the devil points them at the one thing that they don't have. It's the chocolate Easter bunny tree that like looks good, but if you eat the whole thing, you're going to die. And all of a sudden, that's the only thing that we can think of. It's like when your sibling has a toy and you have all the toys, the other toys, but that's the only thing that you can think of. And so, and this is really, there's a whole sermon in this or a whole series in this, but this is ultimately what the enemy did. And if there's one thing that our society is saying right now, it's this. It's like, hey, isn't God great? You could be like God. What he's actually saying is you could be God if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and decide what is right and wrong for yourself. You will actually rise to be your own God. But there's only one God. And then God never said, I told you so. He sent Jesus down to bleed out, to pay the price for your sin that separated you from a holy God, so that you can benefit from the firstborn among many brethren, it says, the firstborn, Jesus. And you get all of everything that he got, you get. And it's hard to get mad at God after that. He cleaned up a mess that he didn't make. And he paid it for you. Now, is this Easter going to be like last Easter? Because maybe you were here last Easter, and maybe this Easter, it's just like last Easter, but with a little less hope than you had, and life is kind of passing you by. Will you go back from this and resume operations with no purpose and no vision in your life and try to make the best of it? This is what we do, is we tell ourselves a story. First, you do it because you know that something's not working, and so you have to tell somebody why it's not working. And you never tell them that your choices were the reason why it's not working. So you have to have a story that with some truth in it. You have to have a story, but the trouble is the more you tell the story, the more you actually believe your own story, until it actually changes how you think of everything, even in the past. And it actually tells you a new version of that makes this place you're in right now, which is not where God wants you, make sense and be okay. And all of a sudden you're okay with this. And all of a sudden you're still sick, but you won't say it. And how can you ever be healed? But last Easter, I think Jackie, I'm getting all the choirs mixed up here. We have 4 of them today, but Jackie. So Jackie invited a friend named Courtney. And Courtney, her first service was last Easter. And we just baptized Courtney. And I'm like, we heard her story, and I realized one Easter ago, because of one invite from somebody who's found purpose in Jesus and a relationship with Jesus, 1 year from a year ago, she's like going to small groups, and she's serving in church. She knows why she exists on earth. She's connected with God and with people. She's actually giving money to help adopt the next one. And she's singing on the choir later. And I'm like, 1 year of her life. Or it could be like many other stories that we don't know, because a year ago they didn't make a decision that is available for you today that Thomas faced. Now, doubting Thomas was late to the party. He wasn't the best and the brightest, but he made the best decision he could eventually that changed everything for him. Now, I don't want to get through all of the... In John 20, we hear the resurrection and the account of the resurrection. It starts with a woman named Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, it says Jesus had cast out 7 demons from her. She was a horrible, awful mess. And Mary Magdalene is having a tough morning because the Savior of the world, who freed her from the bondage that she was in, is dead. So she's having a tough morning. She's just around him because that's all that she's got left. And she doesn't know if she goes back home, if those other things come back. And she doesn't know if she's just going to drop right back into her past in the next 5 minutes, because she might. if there's nothing to stop it from happening again. So she's having a rough day. And then she sees that the stone has been rolled away. And then she goes and sends for Peter. And the Gospel of John says, and the other disciple, this is kind of funny here. And if you don't get guys, you won't really get this. But John is written by John, who calls himself the other disciple. He also calls himself the one whom Jesus loved. So he's like the one whom Jesus loved, but I'm too humble to say that it was me. So it's like I'm Jesus' favorite. So then he tells a story that Mary's reading some years later, and he tells a story about him and Peter trying to race to get to the tomb. And this is like Mary's worst day of her life here. And then she's reading the story years later, and she's like, you got to read it yourself. There's a lot of verses telling about the race. And John's basically like, and the other disciple won, just to drop that in there. And Peter's an old man. So that's the history. Meaning though, somebody else got there first, and Jesus did something for somebody else first. And then it says this: that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And I think this is what we do. We often lock the doors of our lives and build walls to keep something out. But it's funny, Jesus was standing right there inside among them. Peace be with you, he said. As he spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hands and in his side. They were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, was not with the others when Jesus came. He was late to the party. Where was he? So all week long, I'm like, where could he have been? Everybody else is there. And Thomas isn't. Was he distracted by his career? Did he have too much stuff? Did he not have enough stuff? Was a relationship failing? Did he have a fight with his, if you came to Easter service, you had a fight with your spouse on the way here if you're married. How did he know? I know stuff. If you have a child, something went horribly wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like every time that you move closer to God, there's more pressure and distraction to get you away from it. Because the devil hates that and hates you. So he's not there. They told him, we've seen the Lord, but he replied, I won't believe. And somebody here has said that. You know what? This is fine for you, but I won't believe unless and then he gets super graphic, unless I see the nail wounds in his hands and put my fingers into them and place my hand into the wound in his side that the Roman spear went into. Now we know Thomas is a bit of a creep. I walked in on my wife one time watching TV, and she was watching eye surgery on the television. That's disgusting. My wife, she's always like, hey, what do you want to do on date night? And she still to this day, she started this a long time ago. Still to this day, she's like, we should give blood. And I'm like, no! God put this blood in my body. And if you ran out of yours, that's on you. I'm keeping this. I was born with it. I'm going to die with it. I'm also deathly afraid of needles. So most of it, and now somebody's going to put needles in me and steal my blood and give it to you. And I think it's because Pastor Aaron just wants me to faint, because I do faint at the sight of needles. And that would be her perfect date night. It's me just totally collapse on the couch so she can read a book. And then if I'm making too much noise, she can just hold a pillow over my face. And everybody else got something that Thomas didn't get. An opportunity. The lines fell to them. They were in the right place at the right time, and it wasn't him, though. I don't think that he said this and was bitter because he didn't want to see Jesus. I think he was afraid to. I think his heart couldn't handle the disappointment. It's one thing to lie to yourself. It's another thing to stand in the sight of God and say, what do you think? Because you don't know the character of God and his love and his mercy. I think he was afraid to hope. Come on, venue, that there might be more. I think he just bled too much hope. 8 days later, though, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. I think he made a decision that you could make today. I am not missing out again. I am committing to be with those who have been with him, because he might appear again, and I'm never going to miss that again. The doors were locked, but suddenly as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you. The reason he has to keep saying peace be with you is because that would be freaky as heck. Come on up, worship team. That would be like all the doors are locked and pastor shows up in your house while you're screaming at the dog. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, peace, guys, relax. Relax. Don't be late for church. Relax. He says, Thomas, put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side if you want to be gross. And then he says this. I made that up. And then he says this. Don't be faithless any longer, but believe. What you're really worried about is that what I did for them, I wouldn't do for you, Thomas. You're afraid you couldn't handle the disappointment. My Lord and my God, he exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. Now, who is that written for? It's not written for Thomas. Thomas is in heaven with Jesus. It's written for you, actually. It's written for me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing. There is a greater grace coming. There is more of the Holy Spirit coming to the earth. There is more miracle working power to change your situation and to change you that is coming if you're with those who have been with him. Thomas, early church tradition, puts him in his life in India, meaning he went further than any other apostles did. He was the only one who got out of the Roman Empire. And it's one of the reasons that most people think that so many of that nation are named Thomas. Why St. Thomas is a huge figure in their faith, because he was the one who went further, but he didn't start going further. He started with the doubts, and he started with the bitterness, and he started with the disappointment, and he started with this event that could have happened that he could hang all of his future failures on. But he made a decision that you could make today, that I'm never again missing the opportunity to be with those who've been with him. And so great was his relationship with the risen Savior that he was martyred in his mission. So intimate and so full of power. How it started doesn't have to be how it ends. I have a friend here that grew up in a troubled home. I asked her if I could share this. Grew up in a troubled home. Experienced sexual abuse. Kind of came out of that flavor of like, okay, so this is on you, so you got to do it all. So business, entrepreneur, tried all the things, married. She said struggled for like 15 years with intimacy and marriage because there were all these events that were like, yeah, but they can have that, but I can't have that because of this. You know, parents divorce. Like, who's going to show me what to... I can't because of all of this. And they came to church one day, never been to church. Family came to church one day and made a decision that anybody can make. And And I see her now. And in spite of all of that, she has everything now. She has an incredible relationship with Jesus. Her kids all love Jesus, know why they exist, know why they're here, connected deeply with people, great relationship with her husband. I'm like, if we could just turn off that voice of the snake that keeps telling us that we can't because of something else. Because all that's doing is distracting us from the only decision that anybody can make, that a year from now could change everything for you. And I want to inject some hope that if this person I'm talking about can be free, anybody can be free. Because everybody is God's favorite.